The Gold of the Gods by Erich Von Daniken. Now, except for up in the trees and apparently on top of the roof, this is the highest spot of the property. So I thought it'd be fitting to talk about Erich Von Daniken's book here. And non-medal, golden artifacts, the underground chambers in Ecuador and places like that. Some of my favorite material that these people bring up. Although, mind you, my conclusions aren't quite the same. I do see some possibilities of some stuff. But, so, the pictures. And 56 squares. It's an important number for me because the tarot has 56 of the minor arcana. You know, you got the 4 aces, the 16 court cards, king, queen, prince, princess, the 36 pips, and the number 56 features in mythology a lot, so you possibly might not have that sort of thing shown there. Erich Von Daniken likes his stone balls. Apparently some of them are natural, some of them aren't. There's been things found in stratas of society, stratas of material that would date to eras making it impossible. But there are aberrations in geology, as anybody might know. So finding something in a layer that should be millions of years old or even a billion years old that indicates human technology or maybe extraterrestrial technology is highly possible. People have been using shoes and a lot of stuff a lot longer than people may realize. One thing I thought I'd like to point out that I thought was this guy doesn't understand. Yes, he doesn't understand the psychological things. He doesn't understand spiritual things. He is too physical. But if you know Mesoamerican iconography, you see that bees, just because you think those look like weapons, and just because you think an artifact of a suckerfish is, but I will agree that the archaeologist in presuming everything as a god is, that's not quite accurate. And, people went underground. They went underground to get water. They went underground, maybe even artificially making meditation chambers. There were other spiritual gifts per se related to a lot of these monuments, and we have to admit that people but okay, why were all these underground chambers? Monasteries fleeing persecution of humans. Of course, if you have a head start, you can kind of burrow your way in. You can kind of camouflage the entrance and work more on artificial things. And this is a very interesting one. It kind of reminds me of a star card, but this, it's at least 6,000 years old, maybe twice that. Kind of reminds you of the world card more than anything else. You got somebody standing, they got the negative and positive, and, people thought about the themes. They didn't think that everything was a god, and prehistoric representations of dinosaurs certainly either came from legendary exaggerations related to those things themselves, or they, well, I mean, of current creatures, and it's perfectly reasonable to think that certain features of currently living creatures could lead us to ideas about what actually existed in the past. It doesn't mean that they've actually encountered these beings. Now, the ancients found the remnants of... Okay, this is recorded. The ancients found the remnants of, you know, the same sort of fossils and stuff that we find today. Now, they knew. You find people in the 1800s and stuff, if they saw a bone, you know, I think there was a scientist back in the 17 or 1800s who was who had been a butcher / hunter, and by looking at the tooth or the bone or whatever, he knew what the creature was. He knew the sort of thing that it could do, even if it was a new creature to him. And so his guesses that proved true about animals from areas that he had not been, we could also presume that people like that could have guessed about animals in areas of times that had long gone. And domes, people experimented with shapes for tents and all sorts of things. That doesn't mean much of anything. And exaggerated and symbolic features doesn't mean that we have a bunch of space artifacts. But mythology does give us ideas for technology. And there are things being represented. Ancient peoples made marks of the sun and the stars and tried to figure out these patterns. And going back tens of thousands of years, humans were keeping track of these things. So to develop a history of why this, that, or the other made it into mythology, we don't have to have space aliens telling us these things. You look at a degree of the shift of the wheel of the stars every 72 years. So in a good long lifetime, like my father's lifetime, as you see in that video of his conversion experience that he shared, was something that he's lived long enough to see the wheel of the stars shift 1 degree. And he's still good enough at math to figure out how long that would take for the whole thing to make a cycle. And pictures of birds and other things doesn't mean there has to be a bird cult. And if you know something about how birds and such are shaped, you can get ideas of how flying machines might be. And now, the calculating God idea that you have people with weird numbers of fingers or toes, there are disformities. We look at animals that may have, 3 toes or 4 toes or 6 toes or something on a limb. And therefore, we look at that and say, okay, there may be some power attached to that. We may look through the trees. The light may shine through in a particular way that gives a certain number of rays, and we represent that. And I do think that one thing, aside from some of his presumptions, I don't like how he told people exactly where to go to find this guy guarding a whole mess of gold. That was probably not the right thing. Humans have been in war. We found decomposing bodies. The ideas that we know are anatomy. It was Christendom that took us to a point where, okay, maybe investigating the remains was a thing that we shouldn't do. So autopsies and stuff like that, even in terms of suspicion, they were not things that, you know, I mentioned non-Madal. Non-Madal's a very interesting thing in the whole, but did things happen tens of thousands of years ago? Apparently, you go back as far as evidence for humankind, which is now back to about 11 million years, and you find that they worked metal. You find disc with silver, with patterns on it that you think could be writing even. But so the idea that things were built at a different time, and yeah, birds and other animals go places to hide. So it doesn't mean that there's some special magnetic draw or something to these places underground. It's just, okay, they try to fly deep into the cave. I know I'm going to die, so I'm going to go as far away from the people as I can. So they go out in the woods and you don't find the body. And honestly, the cats and stuff here have done that sort of thing. We need to be very careful about preserving our artifacts and, you know, marking them down. I don't think the value on the black market for things alone explains a lot of stuff. But some things, as an interview that he does do some scholarly stuff, some guy that I'm hoping to interview, but mostly he mystically feels stuff, or divine stuff as you would call it. And while I may not agree with his methods, you do find sort of things. And you have myths of the actual getting down and physically making the world. It doesn't mean that the aliens flew in with granite blocks, even if you do have this idea that granite blocks came down from the sky and that sort of thing. Because meteors and stuff did come down, and people knew that stuff like that did happen. Probably not to the extent that it did, but iron being sent down, for example, is a myth that the Quran has, is that water and iron came down to Earth, and apparently the water and iron that we do have on this planet, the water mostly came from elsewhere, and he's still pulling this. He's still pulling that Uzbekistan rock drawing. Perhaps Dr. Vyacheslav Sizev fed him the piece of information that was not quite true. That, oh, well, this drawing, oh, well, I guess this one's a little different, but, or maybe it's the same one. But anyways, he was fed a wrong piece of information. And the aprons, in terms of a modesty thing, very common. Yes, they worship the sun and the moon and various other things. Our ancient ancestors did do things like that. You do have ideas of the etheric body, which is light, heat, moisture, and magnetism, and how that may have connected one thing to the other. Snakes. You do see forms that remind you of snakes when you get into the visionary state. There are laws of nature that relate to that. People had tight-fitting helmets for war and protection in hunting and various other things. Crafts. That had nothing to do with flying to outer space. But snakes are as a symbol of the universe. And other systems of using sound in meditation will lead you to the point where you see yourself as a rainbow snake, as a rainbow dragon, because you have your arms and your legs, and then you have this in between, and you sense and you feel and perceive, like as you move through the various states, evoking the chemical reactions within you. That it explains a whole lot of meditation. A whole lot of mythology. And, okay, a weird one. 10,000 years ago, pierced through the skull. I'm going to admit straight up that I don't have the explanation for everything. But we do have explosions and other things that happened naturally. And the jungles that exist today and other things didn't, so non-Medal. But the ancients were a lot more patient than we are. We gotta admit that one. Yeah, don't tell people where to find gold. If you can just get to this country and figure out how to get out, you'll have millions of dollars worth of gold. In in that age of time, it's not quite the thing that you should do as an anthropologist. Perhaps keep some details secret, have it verifiable for the scholars. But pyramids, nothing to do with Egypt alone and Egyptian culture going back and forth, but there is some things. 14,000 years ago. And again, traditions of animals, etchings of animals that were, people going from one place to the other. I explained that. I'm going to keep going as long as this recording's going. So I have a couple minutes left. And a fat paunch, a wheel facing out of it. People used to have temples, and there were different layers to the temples, and maybe you'd want to have a peephole, and maybe you'd have a symbolic birth. Okay, a symbolic birth, and we have various stages. Why did people go underground? Sometimes they were fleeing wars, but you think the aliens would have got ahead of them, right? And the distance between the islands. People were desperate enough when they were dying of food to go off into the ocean, following the winds, figuring this is our best chance. And over time, the patterns of the winds and such were learned. But how many people had to die to figure that out? And how many people had to die experimenting with things connected to birds before we figured out, hey, we can actually have something that flies or floats or something now. And of course, the heavens and the earth and various other places like this, entities that they considered gods, were that. We do have signs in science that the space travel is more and more possible at speeds that far exceed the speed of light. The science is there that it's possible, but we're not even close. But the government develops technology so fast. And, okay, yellow and red circles, what could that mean? Again, we have layers of auras and other stuff that we can have. I don't really see the technical plan going on in there. Flying machines, the visionary state, the dimethyltryptamine, where you leave your body. Sometimes you go up, sometimes you go out, sometimes you even go below. And there's other chemical states that change how you feel and you see. And I've mentioned some of that, I'm sure. There are beings on different planes of existence. And to stay warm and cold, massive layers of what we have. There's certainly stuff like that going on. How will we communicate with cultures that don't know our language?